Hello, I'm Reid. I'm based in Oxford in the United Kingdom. It's 3 p.m. where I am. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or whatever to wherever you are. We're going to be looking at, let's get my presentation back up because I was having a bit of problems. We're going to have a look at Azure Active Directory and what we can do from it for a user and device administrative help security perspective. We're basically going to look at all the things that are available in Azure Active Directory, so that we can do things within our organizations and to our customers, if we're consultants, to benefit their organizations for whatever they need them to do, and look at the modern way of looking at identity and directory. Okay. Obviously, you've got on the screen a couple of slides. I say my name is Reid. I'm a director of a company called MB Consult, and the guys who are running this are part of the people who run the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference, and so you'll have seen plenty of slides about that for next year, if we can all leave our homes, that is. And thank you to the sponsors who have put some funding and the community rooms and the breakout rooms and stuff like that aside to be able to put this conference on. Okay, so I said Oxford, the United Kingdom. I'm a Microsoft MVP, Office 365 MVP, and I'm a subject matter expert in Microsoft 365. So I cover all of the Microsoft 365 stack and all the pieces that go with it. MB Consult's a gold partner. We're based in UK, South Africa, and Hong Kong. Okay. So we have a global presence. Okay. And in a previous life, I was an Exchange certified master. So a long time ago, when everything was on premise and premises, I used to do Exchange Server almost exclusively, and did the certified master program for that. I used to teach the certified master program for that in Redmond. So I'm missing my ability to travel to Redmond because I can't leave the town in which I mostly can't leave the house that I'm in. Although lockdown here has changed in the last couple of days, and my family have all headed out to see some friends and left me in the house on my own. So there'll be no background noise from the children. Okay. If you have not been and had a look at the raffle, go and have a look at that, enter that and submit 5 correct answers from the sponsors, and see if you can win yourself some virtual reality goggles. Okay. And there's a call for some organisations who are looking after people who are affected by COVID-19, and there's obviously a number of charities around the world doing this. Here's some that the organisers have picked, and if you feel so directed, you can do that. And then questions for joining. So thank you for joining. Questions, speaker feedback, and so on, and we'll get those slides up at the end. Okay, so let me this slide deck appears not to be responding to my clicks. There we go. Right. So what we're going to look at? Well, we're going to look at users and identities. We're going to look at devices, and we're going to look at apps, and we're going to see all that from the perspective of my Azure Active Directory, my tenant's Azure Active Directory. Okay. Let's go to full screen for the slideshow, please. And I'm just going to bring up my Contoso demo environment, and that's what we're going to have a look at. Okay, so I'm going to assume that my camera is off and you can't see my camera anymore. So what have I got on the screen? Okay, well, I've got a demo environment for Contoso, and I'm just going to have a look around and show you what's there and see what will benefit you. There's a Q&A, so if you feel like asking questions, drop them in the Q&A. We'll come back and look at them at the end. Okay, so Azure Active Directory as a directory of my identity. Okay, it's got the word Active Directory in it. It's just your Active Directory in effect, but it's got on steroids. It's the new version of it. Okay, we do in a lot of organisations we'll start with Active Directory still on premises, and we're extending our Active Directory into the cloud, and that's where we extend it to. We extend it into Azure Active Directory. But for a number of organisations, probably ones that have just started out in the last couple of years, new organisations, they probably don't have an Active Directory. They've started directly in the cloud. Okay, so both environments work, and your identities can either be synced from AD up, or they can be created in the cloud. General recommendation is you tend to do one or the other. It tends to get a little bit more complicated when you've got some users who are synced from AD and some from the cloud, or created in the cloud. Although, as you will see as we talk about some of the stuff that we're going to look at here today, that's going to happen anyway with things like guest accounts and so on. Okay, so we're in the portal.azure.com, and we've got on the left hand side, we've got our navigation menu. We're basically going to work our way down our navigation menu, have a look at what's available to us. And when we see what's in there, we can have, first of all, have a look at users. Okay, so the list of all my users appears on the screen. It's a demo environment, so I've got lots. It's got some strange domain name there. Okay, but for example, I've got my user, I've got their picture. Okay, I've got their user principal name or their username. That's what they'll log on with. Okay, and I've got the idea of whether they're a member or a guest. Okay, so a member is someone in your directory. They're employed by you. They work for your organization if you want. Okay. Secondly, we've got the idea of a guest. They're external. A good idea of a guest is someone who's not on your payroll, someone who's not paid by your organization. You invite the guest in so the guest can share resources within your organization and applications within your organization. And we'll talk more about that in a bit, but we can choose to do that. By default, that's enabled, and there's options to let me disable that if I'm in a highly compliant or an organization that doesn't share its data in this way, or you know, joint development and production. You know, they work and then stuff is put out publicly some other way. Okay, so I take, for example, let's take a user. So click on Alex there. Okay, there's lots of things I can see about Alex as it loads up on the screen there. Okay, for example, I can see the groups that Alex belongs to. I can look at the applications that Alex has available to him. Okay, and I can look at the licenses. From a license perspective, let's just click on licenses. From a license perspective, this is typically the Microsoft licenses that I see. Okay, so I'll have access to the different licenses. I can see them there. I can see what services are enabled. So, for example, a license might come with, let's see that top license, the Enterprise Mobility and Security E5. That license has 9 components to it, but for this user, only 8 of them are enabled. So we can see that there and see what they've got turned on for them, for example. Okay. But for applications, this tends to be the things that are not directly Microsoft. Applications that are loaded in from third parties. So, for example, this user here has access to a number of applications, Box, LinkedIn, Salesforce, and Twitter, in this particular example, and he's got access to them because they're a member of a group. That's how they got access to them. Okay, and so we could have a look at those applications as well and configure how they work, and we'll come back to a bit of that as well. But you notice that they're not Microsoft ones. So the licenses tends to be Microsoft almost exclusively. Applications tends to be non-Microsoft almost exclusively. Okay. From a user perspective, I can have a look if they're an administrator, what roles do they have within the system. Okay. And this user doesn't have any roles, they're just a user within the system. I can have a look at their authentication methods. This user hasn't set themselves up for any MFA with a phone number or a text, for example, but I could see that. And from an administrative perspective, here's where I could go to reset their MFA if they'd lost their device or something like that. Okay. I've also got some reporting. We'll come back to reporting frequently throughout this talk, but we'll see, for example, that this particular user hasn't signed in. It's only a demo environment. But if I looked at sign-ins, there we go, sign-ins specifically in the viewpoint of a user, okay, then I see the sign-ins of that particular user. Okay. So I can filter down on stuff like that. Okay. So if I go back to Contoso, back to the parent within the user experience, okay, I can see, for example, that the name of the organization, that the license, so it's an Azure ADP 2 license here, that my role is global administrator, that's highlighted there. And we can see, for example, that I haven't done any sync on this tenant. There's no AD on this environment, it's just a demo environment, but I would see if it was syncing from AD and when it last synced in from AD, for example, as well. Okay. From the perspective of licenses, let's have a look halfway down our tree. I'm just going to jump up and down the user experience a bit. Just I'm going more for like a user identity and then a device identity. So I'm not going to go down in order in the list. Okay? But if we take a look at licenses, then it will show me all the licenses that I've purchased that are available to use. Okay? So for example, I can click on all products, and within my organization, it'll tell me the licenses I've got. But there's some very useful stuff here that I can do from an identity perspective, from a user perspective. I could pick an application, for example, the Office 365 E5 license is listed here. Okay? I can pick the license and it will tell me what users have got it. On the previous page, it told me how many licenses I had and if I was over, approaching my license count and stuff like that. But I've also got available to me licensed groups. Within licensed groups, I can create a group. We'll come and look at group creation in a moment. I could create a group and I could assign to the group a license. Okay. With assigning to the group the license, what I can do is I can say, if you're in the group, you get the license. Okay, makes it really easy to roll out applications by the virtue of licensing to the users. So, for example, in this case, I would roll out, for example, the E5 license to people by putting in the group, rather than assigning them directly, or rather by running scripts for it. Okay, and you just have a joiners and leavers and movers process that's built around the groups that they belong to. They belong to a group to get access to the rights of the application. They leave the group, they don't get access to the application anymore. We saw back on the user slide that the user had access to some applications, Box and Salesforce was listed there, and they were assigned by group. So we can do the same thing there as well. We can give users applications by groups, just like we give users licenses by groups as well. Okay. So that's not set up in this demo tenant, but it's really easy to do. For example, I could say assign. I could pick myself a group, okay, and all my groups are going to appear over here on the right hand side. Actually, all my users and my groups are going to appear on the right hand side over here. Okay. But I could go, I don't think I actually made one in this tenant. Okay. I tend to call mine Azure, so I didn't make one. I could pick the group. Oh, there we go. No, I did make one. I thought I did. M365 license group. So I could make a group called the M365 license group, and then I could set the options that I want to do for that group. So, for example, I could give you everything. Okay? But let's say we weren't a company that used Staff Hub. I could turn that license off. Or the recently turned on bookings. Let's say that's not relevant to my organization. So I could turn the license off for it and the user doesn't get it. Okay? So we can click OK on that. Okay? And so now I've got assigned. Okay? I've now, it'll say assigning and approving that. Okay? So just refresh that and it'll turn up there in a moment. It takes a little time to turn up. So not enough time to wait for it from the demo perspective, but it will list me the group, okay? And then anybody who's a member of that group now gains that license. Okay? It's a really great way of managing my users from a licensing perspective. Okay? Let's go back to Contoso. So up at the top, I've got the breadcrumb trail, and I can move my way around the different panes of the Azure portal relatively easily. Okay. Personal opinion, it's a lot easier to navigate around this than it is the Microsoft admin portal. And you'll notice that a lot of things I can do here, I can do in the Microsoft admin portal as well. So as a recommendation, if you've not really ever looked here to see what you can do with Azure AD, do come and have a look at what you can do in here. That will be a good takeaway from this talk. Okay. So let's go back up, click my company name. Okay. I'm going to take myself now down to a feature called password reset. Okay, password reset allows me obviously to change my password. It's a feature called self-service password reset. It allows the user to change their own password. Okay, so if I was to bring up a browser window, and I've got a window open here. So if I went and did say Control-Shift-P and brought up an in private browser window, just pop it there. I'm using Firefox in this example, but it doesn't really matter. And went to office.com. Office will ask me to sign in. The application could be any application through which I'm signing into Azure Active Directory to use. Okay? And I'll say sign in, and it'll give me a sign in box. Okay? And so I could type in, but I've got this option here, can't access your account. Well, if I click can't access your account, it says, right, is it a work account or a personal account? So it's a work account in this case. And it will ask me what my login name is. It's got a CAPTCHA to enter, just as a gate to stop lots of data being sent to this service and causing it to have a denial of service. Okay? So you fill in user identity, you fill in the CAPTCHA, and there's an audio one if that helps, and you click next. And it'll step you through a process. You have to register for this process first. Okay? And so by default, self-service password reset is turned off. Okay? You can turn it on to a group of people to pilot it, and then you should move it to all. Now it's part of Azure ADP1, so obviously when you say all, every user has to have a license for this feature. You can't just have one license and give it to everybody. Though it would work, that will be a violation of the license. And so you would have Azure ADP1 for all users, and you would give them password reset functionality. So you would do something like this. Let's say we did this. Let's say I turned it on for all users. Let's say all my users had the license. Okay, and so I'd make that setting, save that change. And then I've got a number of options like, for example, authentication methods. How do I actually go about changing my password? What do I have to do? How do I prove that it's me? Okay, and so that's what the authentication methods is. So for example, I could say, well, I require 2 methods to change your password. I need you to prove yourself twice to change your password. Okay? And so I'm going to say mobile app notification and mobile app code. Now I can't use both those. They can't be the 2 things. I can either use the code or the notification as one of the 2 things. Okay? And I could have, like, say, an alternate email address or a text message or something like that. Okay? If I synced my office telephone number from AD, my office telephone number could be a valid option there as well. And I've also got the ability to security questions, ask 5 questions, get 3 of them right. Anybody with an admin role can't use security questions, but you could do it for users. Okay? It's the least secure one. It's considered rather the least secure one of the options. Okay? So you'd set your notifications and you choose your options. Okay? And then the user would be invited to register. Okay? And they'll get that at the next login, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Okay. So I'm just going to click save on that. It's a demo environment, doesn't really matter what changes I make here, but we'll make those changes. Okay? If you've got Azure AD P2 license, okay, then you've got, sorry, ignore that, something else. You've got the registration option. Okay? How often is the user going to be asked to reconfirm their settings? So in this case, twice a year at login, the user is going to be said, is this your alternate email and is this your telephone number? Are they still correct? Yes. Okay. Set that to 0 and then never asked to reconfirm their settings. Okay. Set it to a bigger number and they'll only reconfirm them every year or 2. Okay. And you can do things like notify when passwords change. You can do things like change the branding, so you have your company logo and stuff like that during the process. And here's an excellent one. If you do have AD, your Azure AD Connect server that does your sync of your settings up to Azure AD can also act as your bridge to take password changes back down to AD. So when the user changes their password in Azure AD, they can change their password back in on premises as well. And that's specifically, that's the thing that needs Azure AD P1 for if you're a synced user. If you're a cloud-based user, you can use this because it's the only way you've got changing your password. But if you're an AD-based user, of course, you've still got Control-Alt-Delete or phone up your help desk or what other methods that are available to you as well. Okay, and so you can enable that if you had Azure AD Connect installed. And it's an option in Azure AD Connect, and turn it on in Azure AD Connect, and then come and turn it on here. Okay. Okay. So there's some of the things I can do from a user perspective. Okay. The user can then access their application. So now they can log in. They've got a username, they've got a password, they've got the ability to reset their password. They've got some licenses through the groups that we've put them into. Okay. So the user can come up and the user can log in and the user can access their applications. How are they going to find their applications? Well, the first place they could go to find their applications is Office Portal. So we could go to office.com. Okay, and it asks me here to sign in because it always does the very first time you use it. Okay, and it says, here we go, I've been asked to register some details. Now this is because I've set up password reset. Because I turned that on and I set it up for everybody, I now have to do it. So it comes at the next login. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take you into this just to look at it, but I'm not going to complete it. Okay, but because it's my first login, and take me through that and do my password register, and up pops the password registration page. Okay. Now there's a couple of different password registration experiences. This is the new one, and we'll talk about how you turn that on in a moment as well. But it'll talk about setting up the Authenticator app. Remember, I turned on app and code, so they start appearing in the option. I said you had to have 2 options, so we can see, for example, that I've got the app, but I've also got the phone. Okay, there's the 2 options. They're picked for me. If I'd chosen passwords as an option, it will show it if there's no better option. So it picks the better options to register with. Okay, so that's the registration experience. But once I've signed in, okay, and I'm going to skip setup at this point, and imagine I've done it. Okay, just to avoid time. Hey, I've got to my app portal. There's my apps. You'll be very familiar with this. I can access my apps from here. I can click all apps. It takes me down to the all apps page. And I'm signed as the admin, so I don't have. Let's ignore the welcome to the first time one, okay, and all my apps. And so if I was that user Alex from earlier, I would see Box and SharePoint and Box and Salesforce and so on this list as well. Okay, there's also available to me the option for my apps. It's myapps.microsoft.com. Okay, that's another portal, and there's a new my apps experience coming, and I've got that shown at the top. Okay, so if I click try it, it'll take me to the new My Apps experience. In July this year, that will become the default experience. Again, every time I log in now, I'm going to get asked to set up self-service password reset because I turned that on. That was probably a bit of a mistake. Demo environments and all that sort of thing, and how things go wrong in demos. But I have the option to skip setup, so I can go past that. But here's the new My Apps experience. And what's not visible here, because I've never set it up, is I've got the ability to have collections. I can have groups, and they appear up here at the top, up where it says all apps. So I can have something like finance and sales and HR and so on. I can have different groups of applications. And that's a nice new feature that's available and will roll out to everybody in July. Okay. And I can see all that and do all that from Azure Active Directory from the enterprise node, the enterprise applications node. So I can see the applications that are set up. For example, there's the Box application that we mentioned earlier. And so I could go into the application that's going to Box, and I could say, okay, well, who's the users and groups that are allowed to use it? So if I click on users and groups, we see there's two groups, finance and sales and marketing. And so our user Alex must be a member of at least one of those two, because that's how they got access to the Box application. I could add users individually. Of course, the best way to do it is via the group. It makes it easier to manage. And I either give them by whatever method you have for doing group management. From a properties perspective about the application, it says down the bottom, visible to users. And we can see visible to users, yes. So I see the application on My Apps. So I could click the Box icon on My Apps, and it would sign me into Box with my Azure AD credentials. And my Azure AD credentials, of course, are the same as my AD credentials because I've synced them up from the cloud. Maybe I've turned on single sign-on in Azure AD Connect, and so actually my Windows login becomes my Azure AD login, which becomes my Box login. And from an IT perspective, administrative perspective, that means that someone leaves the company or changes role, I can change the applications they have and now they can't access them anymore. Or I could disable the account and remove the license, maybe, and then they can't access the application anymore either. And I do it once. I don't have to have go into Box and disable them, and then go into Salesforce and disable them, and so on and so on and so on. The user can single sign into all your corporate apps, both cloud and on premises, and all your Office apps, all with their same identity based off their Windows or their Azure AD identity. They don't actually have to be sitting on Windows. They could be on an Android, they could be on an iPhone or whatever device, and that would work there as well. Okay. All right. If the application supports single sign-on, to the third-party application, then you can go and enable that. So there's a couple of different single sign-on options. Let's just go change because that's not set up here. For Box, was set up for password-based. But if you've got a SAML application or an application that supports linked headers, then you can sign in that way as well. There's a number of different ways of passing the credentials and passing the token into the third-party application. So that was the enterprise applications. We talked about those different collections. We talked about things like the finance and the HR collection as shown in My Apps, and that's where you set that up. You set that up in collections underneath the enterprise applications node. So there's no collections here, but I can make a collection. Let's say finance. Let's see if this one works fast enough. So I can say finance. I could say the applications within it is, and I could say Box, for example, and the Box got the right logo there. I can say the owners who manage the applications. I can say the users and groups. So I've got a group called SG_finance, sorry, SG-finance. Okay, and so I'll add that group to there, and then review and create, And so what that means, if you're a member of SG Finance and you now go to My Apps portal, and it's the new experience, you'll see all apps, and before that you'll see a collection called Finance, and the Box application will be listed in it. So it's a great way of distributing apps only to little bits of the parts of the organization, or role-based by the organization as well. Okay. Let me take myself back up to Contoso, and we have the enterprise applications. Then we can add the applications from there, like Box and Salesforce, etc. There's thousands of them in the gallery. We can choose them from the gallery. Or if the application is not in the gallery, the manufacturer of the application might have written you some instructions that says this is how to add it. Okay? And that often will involve things like app registrations as well. And so you can write your own custom apps, register them as app registrations, and then publish them via enterprise applications, and there are options that are available to you there as well. Okay. All right. Let's carry on and have a look at what's available to us next. So once we've done groups for licensing, groups for applications, groups for resources, you might think, well, what about when I don't need them anymore? Okay, well, we've got options called identity governance. So we can see identity governance there on the left hand side. Now this is an Azure AD P2 feature. Okay? And identity governance, and this is just the first page is a wizard to walk you through the process. But the general idea of identity governance is, am I entitled to use something? Am I still entitled to use something? Should I have stopped using it a while ago? You know, what's the limit on my right to use an application? Okay? And so I can do stuff like that. I can create an access package and get a life cycle for groups and applications and so on. Okay? I can also do privileged identity management. This is an administrative role. Okay? And so I can say, okay, you can have access to Exchange Online admin, but you can only have it for 4 hours. Okay? So by standing rights, you're not an Exchange admin, but you have the right to become an Exchange admin. And we can have an approval process for that as well. So we can have an approver approve that right for you as well. Okay. Access reviews, should you still be a member of a group? Should you still have a role available to you? And these are options as well. So we can have those. Okay. And then terms of use, we can publish a terms of use. So when you log in, it says, before you use Box, Salesforce, Office 365, here's what you agree to. Okay? And so we can present terms of use. Say, hey, here's the app. This is what we expect of you. You'll have access to the app for 6 months or for the duration of the project or whatever. Okay, and so that's all available for you there, and you can start that process from here, and there's lots of options in there. Okay, you could easily spend, almost certainly will be sessions in this conference on just this bit of Azure Active Directory. And as a note, of course, all this conference is being stored on YouTube, so you can always go back and watch them if they were yesterday, or they clash with some other presentations that you're watching on this conference as well. Okay, the YouTube page is linked off the conference website. Okay, right. What else have we got that we can do from here as well? Well, we talked about those external users earlier. We talked about having a guest user, and we've got a guest user here. Okay, in fact, it happens to be me, so it's Brian. There's Brian. Okay, and it shows me with my username. Now, my username matches my email address. That's a great way to get my Azure Active Directory working. It's really convenient for the user, but nbconsult.co, that's not this organization. That's an account that's external to this organization. I'm a guest in the Contoso organization. Okay? And in this particular case, so it says I'm a guest here. Okay, and over on the right hand side, it says I was invited. I actually ignored the invitation. The invitation came to me and I ignored it. What would happen if I accepted the invitation is I would become a guest within this organization. It doesn't actually therefore give me anything. Okay? But once I'm a guest within the organization, I can then be given access to stuff. So, for example, I could be given access to a team. I could have access to the content of a team. I could belong to an O365 group, which is obviously the piece that sits underneath Teams, or one of the many pieces that sits underneath Teams. I could have access to my apps and a bunch of applications. So I could have, let's say, a third-party application within my organization that does CapEx expenses. That'll do. And we're doing a merger and acquisition, and I've got a bit of the organization that needs access to the CapEx application, but before they're merged into my tenant. Okay? Well, I could invite them in as guests, and I could give them access to the application. And then they can sign into, in this case, Contoso, the Contoso CapEx application, but they could sign in with their, Fabricam or Tailspin Toys or whatever, the other company, the acquired company, with their user account details there. They don't have to know a new account for the new organization. They can keep using their same identity even in another organization. And that's, of course, where the identity governance stuff plays a big part, because if I give access to the guest, do I take it away later? And how do I remember that I should do that? Okay. So normally the user would appear, once they'd accepted their invitation, the user would appear as an external member, and it would show where they were an external member from. So where they're a member from Gmail, which you can set up relatively easily, G Suite, which you can federate with specific G Suite environments, or Azure Active Directory. You don't need to do anything to make that work. Or a third party, they're not synced to Azure Active Directory at all, and you make it makes a guest account for them for that purpose. So you've got your guests, you've got your external users. Now you can have your licenses and your applications and your resources and the time limits for them. okay, both for your members and for your guests. Okay, what else could we do with that? Okay, well, all of that is all based around initially logging in. I've logged in as the user. Okay, I know the username's username and I know the user's password. Okay, we all know passwords are a bad idea, and so Azure Active Directory has a number of options to make sure that the login process, the account is more secure as well. So let's have a look at what we can do from an authentication process before we authorize the user to use the resource. They've got to log in first. So let's have a look at what we can do there. Okay. Well, first thing we can have a look at is over on the left-hand side, we've got company branding. That is over there. And company branding allows me to set up background images and banner logos for my organization. I mean, this one's already got one. If we click on the link, we'll see what's already there. It's a wind farm picture and the Contoso company logo. Okay. And that's the default. I could have a potentially different banner, but I certainly can have different text, different logos in maybe different national languages, by having different locales added as well. Okay. So I can see when I sign into Contoso that it's Contoso. It'll show me it has to be on a bigger screen to do that. If I'm on a mobile device, I tend to just see the logo because the logo sits on the screen, and then I have the username and password field, and I don't see the background that goes around it because the device itself is too small. But on a bigger screen device, I will see the branding graphic as well. Okay, so I can set up the graphic to say here's where you are. Okay. And then I can go into security, which is down at the bottom on the left. That takes me into a whole new section. Okay? And in this section, I've got the ability to do rules on access, this is conditional access, identity protection, which is the user login a risky login or not? Should they be allowed in? What's the risk of letting the user in? Okay. We've got stuff like the named locations that are available. You know, is this location the office? So if they're in the office, they're on the office network, they should be allowed in. Of course, nobody's on the office network really at the moment, but if they are on a trusted device, that's not a named location, but we can do that as well. So I can let people into my resources based on the device they use, based on the network they're in, based on a couple of different choices that I've got available to me. Okay. And the last of those choices is based on whether they pass MFA or not. And we should always have MFA enabled for all of my users, but not necessarily for all of the time. Okay. MFA gets in the way. Okay. It's interruptive to the user and they don't like it. Okay. MFA should be there on first login. Okay. So I'm proving that the user's there, but once the user's in, they're in. Okay, unless there's a material change to the security of the user, we shouldn't be presenting them with an MFA again, maybe occasionally re-prompted just to make sure. But we were looking at having the user signed in, username, password, prove their MFA, register everybody and get everyone to do that. But don't go your MFA every hour or MFA every day. That will just really wind up the user in the middle of doing something. Suddenly they have to present, go click OK on their phone or answer a phone call or something like that, type in a code. And it gets in the way of the productivity of, I'm writing a document or an email to something and suddenly I'm signed out and I need to do this. Okay. But I've got these options and they're available to me. So what can I do? Well, let's briefly, and again, there'll be sessions on this in this conference and lots of material online on things like conditional access. And I'm in the middle of a client project at the moment, so I'm writing up some conditional access rules for a user, for a company. And here's a good example. That company wants to allow OA to work if you're outside the network, but with limited download functionality. But if you're inside the network, and they're based on VDI, so you're always inside the network whenever you connect to this client. In this example, when you're inside the network, you can use Office fully, but when you're outside the network, you happen to be at home or something, you can check your email, but you can't download anything. You can only check your email in a browser. And we're using MCAS to do the browser download blocking. There's actually a number of ways of doing that as well. MCAS is part of the Enterprise Mobility Suite E5 license. Okay. And I use conditional access to set all that up. So I can do things like, if the login is external and it's a browser and it's Exchange Online, then route it via MCAS. But if the login is external and it's not a browser, in other words, it's Outlook or the Outlook app or something else, I'm going to say, okay, they're not allowed. So I'll block those. Okay. But if the network is a trusted network, that will be the public IPs of my corporate network. If the network is a public IPs of my corporate network, then allow the user in. Maybe no MFA. Okay, and you have your choices. Okay? I might say, for example, I could take a device. We'll talk about devices in a moment as we approach the end of the talk, and we can do things like say, trust the device. You know, is the device known to me as a member of my domain, or is the device registered in Intune and currently compliant with all my Intune rules? And if that's the case, then yes, you can access the data on it. But if the device is not compliant, for example, the device has picked up a virus and compliance is no viruses, okay, then I picked up a virus, I'm not compliant, therefore I can't log in on that device. Clean up the virus, bring the computer back to a state of health. That's a conversation all in itself as well as to whether you wipe it and start again. But at least you know it's gone. The antivirus software says it's good again. However, you got that to that endpoint, and then you go, okay, now you can access your data again. Okay. And so they're all options within conditional access, and you basically write rules, and you've got the ability to report and test on those as well. Okay. Identity protection is probably one you've seen less. Is a P2 license. Conditional access is a P1 license, P2 license. And with identity protection, I can do things like user risk and user risk policies. So from a user risk perspective, let's just click on risky users. Alan DeYoung here is at risk. Okay, let's move that window down a bit. There we go. Alan DeYoung here is at risk. Okay, and it says he's at risk. He's at high risk, and we can see various states about him and what happened. Okay, so for example, if I click on the risk history, okay, we can see that he went risky on the 16th of May, and he did it because he browsed from a Tor or a VPN-based anonymous IP address. So not a corporate VPN, they're one of those VPN service providers or Tor browser providers. I don't know where he really is. He's come from an anonymous address. Microsoft have lists of all these anonymous addresses and go, yeah, that might not be you. You're hiding something. Okay? And so they've made the risk high. Well, back in conditional access, I could say, if the user is high risk, they can't sign in. Okay, why have they tried to get in by covering their tracks? Is it really them? Is really the question to ask. Or is this someone who's learned Alan DeYoung's password and is trying to access the data, but isn't actually Alan? Okay. So we've got options like that. We've also got the ability over on the left, and without going into the detail of it, but within the identity protection feature set, I can do registration for MFA. Normally MFA pops up at the first time I'm required to use it. Registration allows me to do MFA before I'm required to use it. So I can register for it before I need it, and I get a 14-day window in which to register. And then I have to register. So there's a bit of grace period as well, which makes MFA registration quite nice. And I've got things like a sign-in risk policy and a user risk policy. A sign-in policy happens at sign-in, user risk is offline and happens behind the scenes and happens next time I sign in, or next time my token is refreshed the next hour or so when that goes on. And so if my risk changes, then I can be, certain things can happen. So for example, if my risk went to medium, I'd have to redo MFA. If my risk went to high, I'd have to change my password, or I'd be locked out or something like that. So I can set rules that say, based on risk, something you have to do something's going to happen, you have to go and do it. Okay? So that's identity protection. Okay? And then back down in security, okay, we've got the authentication methods. This has turned up in the last year or so into this portal. Okay, and in here we've got a couple of things. The first one is the authentication methods policy, where I can set up different policies for accessing the system, and it's mainly passwordless. Okay, on the camera, it's probably quite small because we're sharing my screen, but on the camera, that's a FIDO token. That one's by a company called Fetian. Okay, and what I can do with that is an on switch on the side. I can turn that one on, and then I can put my finger on the fingerprint reader. Okay, it's registered to my fingerprint, and I can log into my computer with this. It doesn't ask me who I am, and it doesn't ask me my password. But I can also sign into Office 365, Azure Active Directory, and all my apps. My credentials are stored here. Actually, there's lots of credentials stored in here. I have the habit of storing my customer identities on them as well, so that I can do, here's how passwordless works, and look, I'm signing into your organization without the use of a password, and it's much more secure. Okay? So that's Fetian, that's a Bluetooth, NFC, USB, nearly everything, USB via a cable rather than plugging it. Then you've got things like YubiKeys, which you might be more familiar with. There's two YubiKey devices. They've got skins on them, so I can have my blue one and my red one. My red one's my demo one and my blue one's a real one. And they're not fingerprint, although YubiKey does have a fingerprint one. And they're capacitive touch. You just put them into reader and tap the button, and tap the sensor and they work. Okay. Here's one by EWBM. That's a fingerprint reader USB-C device. Okay. So again, it's like the YubiKey, but rather than being capacitive touch, it's the fingerprint initiates it as well. Okay. And so all you need is this, and you can log in. Now I can go to any machine that's registered to the use of those credentials, plug it in and use it. Okay, I don't have to set it up specifically on a machine. Okay? I can use Intune to push the settings out first, so it'll take security keys. But then after that, I can very easily sign in. Last one for talking about security keys. So this is an interesting one. This is a badge. You have it on a lanyard around your neck. This one's a smart card. This one's done by HID. It's a smart card. It's got a RFID chip inside, so we can do things like door entry. So we can put it up against the door open panel and the door's open. Okay. It's also FIDO, so I could hold it up to an NFC reader or stick it into put it onto a dedicated HID reader, and I can sign into my apps. So access to my computer, access to my doors, and access past the security guard with my nice picture, which clearly looks nothing like me. There we go. Right. So there's lots of devices there that can take you beyond the username and password experience. As we know, users pick bad passwords, and so let's get to a world where authentication is very secure and convenient for the user as well. Okay? And we can set all that up within Azure Active Directory. Okay, and then we've got password protection. Here's one. If you're not going to roll out the tokens, let's stop the users having bad passwords. Now, if I've got a cloud account, it will do that automatically, but I can take this information and push it down to AD as well. So I can stop a user saying password 123, for example, because it's too common. Okay? Again, we could spend a whole talk talking about how this works. It's brilliant. Really want to enable this if you've got the Azure AD P1 license. But you put an agent on your domain controllers, and now your domain controllers will stop you picking well-known common passwords, rather than your passwords must be 8 characters, capital, symbol, and lowercase and a number, which just makes users pick password 123 exclamation mark, because of course, as we all know, the exclamation mark makes it much more secure. Okay. So there's some of the options that are available to me in there. Okay, let's go back out of the security nodes, because we finished looking at all the things within security. Okay, let's go back up to Contoso. Okay, and in Contoso, we've got a couple of things that we can have a look at. Here's a new one. It still says preview behind the name. We've got administrative units. Okay, now administrative units, just underneath where I managed to stop my there we go. Administrative units. Administrative units allow me to do subsets of management within Azure Active Directory. Okay, it's been around for a long time in PowerShell. Been able to make administrative units via PowerShell for years. Only recently has it come to the portal, which makes it obviously much more accessible and much more easy to use. Okay, if we click on administrative units, for example, there's no administrative units. Well, I could let's just click add, because it gives me a nice one. Let's say UK, okay, and then click add. So I made an administrative unit called UK. Okay, and then I can add my users to the administrative unit. I can add the roles and the administrator. So, for example, I could say that this help desk administrator's role, which is not the help desk administrator's role at the top of Azure AD, this is the help desk administrator's role at the UK piece of Azure AD. If you're a member of this help desk administrator's role, then you can do all the help desk roles against the users in UK. But you can't change a user, for example, who'd be in the USA or the French or the Spanish or whatever administrative unit. So if you've got a help desk or an administrative environment that's desegregated, distributed, then administrative units help you in that. If you've got a centralized environment and everyone's got permission to administer everybody else within the organization, then you don't need administrative units. But you could also use it, for example, for high risk or high value accounts within your organization. So who's allowed to administer the CEO's account, for example, rather than it being anybody in the help desk. It could be you'd make an administrative unit for the CX accounts, and then some members of the help desk are only allowed to administer her account, for example. Okay. So take me back out. So that's administrative units. That's new within there. That's new within Azure AD recently as well. Okay. A couple of other things that are new. Let's go back into enterprise applications. And as we finish off, let's have a look at some of the new stuff that's in here. This one's turned up in the last day or so, last week or so. And there's another piece of it turned up about 3 or 4 months ago. So it turned up 3 or 4 months ago, and it's already in the middle of changing. And this is the consent idea. And the idea of his is that normally a user can say, well, actually, I would like to run that third-party application. That third-party application wants to have access to some of my data. So, for example, you might have a bookings application, and the booking application is, right, I want to have access to your calendar so I can write in the things that you're going to book, or let's say a training application. You know, I want to go and study that training. It goes, okay, you need to book an hour. And it goes, okay, I'll look in your calendar and I'll put an hour aside for you. And you give it access to your calendar, and you give it write access to your calendar to do that. But actually, do you trust that application to that? Do you trust the application to have access to OneDrive to create reports or documents or whatever? Do you trust the application? Up until the last couple of months, anybody could sign up any application within Azure Active Directory from a user perspective. You could just turn it off. But now what you've got is the ability to say, I do trust some applications, and there's an ability to do that. So, for example, I could say, I want to allow consent for apps. Okay, allow all consent, it says there, allow user consent. It says this is not really a good idea. Okay? But I could say allow consent for apps from verified publishers for selected permissions, and this is the new feature. Okay? And I've got the ability to set permissions to classify as low impact. So I go into permissions classification on the left. Okay? There's nothing there to save there for the moment. Okay? And I can say, okay, any application that just needs user read on offline access, OpenID, sign in and profile viewing, for example, there's 4 basic permissions. Any application that needs those 4 basic permissions, yeah, you can have those. As if all the application that runs wants those, then the user can sign up the application. They can register the application with Azure Active Directory for themselves. But if the application wanted, as in my last example, calendar write, that wasn't on the list. And so we can't do that. And so we have to get approval or it gets denied. Okay. So I can set up the basic ones. Okay, and then I come back to user consent settings and I choose that option at the top, and there's 4 permissions classified as low impact. So I could save that. So now within the Contoso organization, any user signing up for an app that has a low write request, they get the application allowed, and anything that's a higher write request, I could go into, it's actually up another level, but it's available under user settings. And then we can say things like, can admins consent? And I can say, yes, admins can consent. So I can set up there, yeah, if the user can't consent, is the admin able to consent on their behalf? And if the admin is able to consent on their behalf, what the admin does is approves the app, and then the user can use the app. So I might say, okay, yes, you can. I'll approve that app for calendar write for you. Okay. Or I can actually go back into the screen I was in just before, and I could add calendar write and say, yeah, calendar write's approved. I can actually add additional rights and give them as well. But then if somebody wanted, SharePoint write, that's a different permission, right? Or user administrator write, no, I wouldn't grant that. Okay, and so you can do that, and you'll get an email. The administrator will get an email, and it will say, Alan DeYoung, he's our high-risk user, so we're not going to let him do anything. Alan DeYoung wants to access this application that needs calendar write, and I've got a 30-day notice, and I can say yes or no, and if I don't do anything in 30 days, I'll get a reminder at 30 days as well, or 25 days with consent expiring at 30 days. Okay. So there's some options that secure my applications that my users can have as well. Okay, and then to finish off, we've got a minute left. We've got lots of reporting and monitoring down the bottom. Okay, so we talked about sign-ins earlier. So down here on the bottom left, I've got the ability to view all the sign-ins and all the audit logs. And again, earlier I could do that per user or per group. What was the sign-in to that user? What was the audit logs for that user, and so on. But here at the top of the node, it's all sign-ins for all users. Okay, so if I was to click on sign-ins, for example, I would see my sign-ins because I signed into the tenant not too long ago. There we go, and I got my interruption because I got asked to password reset registration. So I got interrupted, so it asked me that. I could look at the audit logs and the things I've changed in the talk. Okay, but I've also got the ability to export these logs, sign-in logs and audit logs, to log analytics, and I can set that up in there, and then keep the logs for longer than the 30 days that I get by default in the portal. Okay, and I've got things like available to me, things like workbooks. I can turn them on, I can enable them, and get some useful reporting as well. Okay, so that's not been set up yet because I haven't pushed any data to log analytics. But once I do, then the workbooks look at the data in log analytics, and I can get nice reports on, what applications are failing sign-in, what applications have been attacked by hackers, what applications are, we can get an idea based on the reporting we wanted. And to finish off, usage insights, how are my users doing with their general sign-in? Okay, so for example, I might see something, and this is a demo tenant, so there's nothing really interesting to look at here, but I might see, for example, Exchange Online, successful sign-ins, failed sign-ins. I often see lots of failed sign-ins because the hackers are trying basic auth, and we should turn basic auth off, but the hackers are trying basic auth, and so there's lots of failed sign-ins, and Exchange has a low sign-in success. Turn basic auth off, and you should have a high sign-in success. But if you have apps that have a high sign-in failure, probably means the users aren't managing to sign into it, however, whatever setting you've got, MFA or restriction device or something, and it's causing a productivity issue over a security issue maybe. And so that's a useful thing you can get from there as well. Okay, so there's a whistle-stop tour of basically the left-hand column in Azure Active Directory to give me identity view, to give me a groups view, to give me a view. We didn't actually cover devices in that. We talked about them briefly in the middle of that, but I can take a device and I can list the device in Azure Active Directory, and from there I can push it into Intune to do compliance on it as well, which is about the limit of what I was going to talk about devices anyway. And then, as I said, when I did conditional access, we can say, yes, you can access the app if you're on a certain type of device. All that's available to me. It does depend on the license, but I hope I've given you a look at some of the stuff that's available, whetted your appetite for some of the things that you could possibly do based on your license. And even if you don't think you've got an Azure AD license, but you've got Office 365, you've got the license to do some of that because you've got Office 365. But maybe some of the EMS license suites as well and stuff like that you might want to purchase because it gives you things like better admin controls and better security and more risk-based sign-in restrictions and stuff like that as well. So thank you for attending. I hope you got a lot out of it. Let's bring up the slide deck again, and if I go back a couple of slides, there we go. I'll put the speaker feedback up. Please fill that in, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the show. Bye for now. Thank you very much.